everybody, welcome back to the channel. If you watched last week's video about the bird poop NES, and if you haven't, I'll leave a link to it above, one of the things I didn't do was replace the 72-pin connector. And well, that's a pretty common failure point in these old original NES systems from the 80s. Now, when I first heard about replacing a 72-pin connector, I thought there'd be lots of soldering involved and it'd be a really in-depth, long process. Well, last week's video showed me that that's not the case. It's actually pretty easy. So in this video, we're going to go through the easy process of replacing that 72-pin connector. Stay tuned. Now, if you would have told me just a couple of weeks ago that I could still get a brand new 72-pin connector for an original NES, I wouldn't have believed you. But you can, and they're less than 10 bucks, and they look like they're actually pretty good quality. Now, this is the part that normally fails. After years and years of a cartridge going in and out of here, these pins just wear out, and that's what gives you that error, that blinking red light on the front, or your game's not loading properly. It's actually these little connectors right here, and it's an easy process. So let's get started. Now, the first thing we'll need to do is get the screws out of the bottom of our NES. Now, there are 6 screws on the bottom of this here that we need to take out, and they're regular Phillips head screws, nothing special. Hopefully we don't have to take the entire thing apart, but I think we just have to do minimal disassembly really to get to that 72-pin connector. Now, this is probably something I should have done in that original video, was replace that connector, but at that time I really didn't even know that they were still available. I just happened to be surfing eBay and Amazon, and there they were. There's tons of different ones out there. They're all, you know, $8, $9, $10 as of the recording of this video. So they're nothing expensive, and it's something that I think, you know, just a do-it-yourselfer with minimal experience could probably handle. It's not that big a deal. The main thing is just getting everything apart. Now, this is not the bird poop NES. This is a second one that I had purchased recently. I had mentioned in that last video that I had jumped the gun and bought controllers and a couple of games and everything, and that came with a non-working NES, which is this one here. Now, it powers up just fine, but it doesn't want to load games real well, and I have a feeling that it is actually that 72-pin connector in this that's actually not making good connection, because I could wiggle the games and put them in kind of most of the way and it would work. So I'm thinking that the problem with this one is that connector. So that's why we're using this one. I think I've got all the screws loose. They didn't want to come out together. There we go. Move this out of the way. Probably going to lose all my screws here. There we go. All right. 4, 5, and 6. Those things get a little bit tight in there. All right, so our 72-pin connector is actually underneath this panel right here, so we will need to take this cover off, and there are a few screws for that. Nintendo isn't incredibly complicated, as we talked about before. You know, it's just an 8-bit system with 2 kilobytes of RAM and, you know, basically a 6502 processor. There's not a whole lot to it. All of the memory and storage and everything actually happens on the cartridge. So there's not a whole lot to these things. So there's that. Let me flip this around. We've got a couple of screws on the back to get out of here. This one's actually really clean on the inside. That last one had some surface rust from being left out in the rain and mistreated a little bit. This one is real clean. I think it just got played a lot and worn out a little bit. Get the rest of these screws out. And it's a good idea to try to keep your screws together if you can. I'm known for losing screws or putting stuff back together and then having extra screws left over, which is never a good thing. All right, so let's see if we can pull that off. There we go. Now there's our first view of that 72-pin connector. So the next thing we're going to have to do is take off the cartridge slot, because it looks like we're going to need to get that out of the way to be able to slide this out of there. So we'll go ahead and do that. And there are 6 screws holding that in. These are put together very well, I would say, I mean, for what they are. In the original Famicom, the cartridge is loaded from the top. It was a lot simpler system, but Nintendo wanted to make this into something that parents would want to put in their living room on the main TV, not just some small TV in the kids' room somewhere. They wanted this to be part of your actual entertainment system out in the living room. So they designed this with that front-loading mechanism to make it look more like a VCR, you know, something that the parents could, you know, put out there and it doesn't feel like a toy, so to speak. And you know what? It seemed to work. Nintendo sold millions and millions of these things in the US. And you know what? I do like the looks of the NES more than I do the Famicom. And that's just personal preference. But I like that front load mechanism. I think it looks nice. All right. This last screw out of here. I don't think I'm missing anything. Nope. All right, so if I remember from the last one, this thing's a little bit finicky coming out of here. I remember it being a little bit tight. There we go. Just have to clear that notch on the front there. All right, so there is our 72-pin connector. Looks like we will have to remove the board to get this out of here because there's not enough clearance in the back. So we actually have just a couple of screws holding this in, and they're back here by the RF modulator and video outputs. So we get that out. There's one. And 2. So far, nothing overly complicated. Just a matter of taking your time and making sure you get all your screws out. All right, so this is only held on by tension, this shield here. And it does, I'm going to spin this around so we can see, these connectors do have to come off to get this shield completely off of here, but we don't need to take the shield completely off to get to the connector. It's accessible without removing that. So I'm just going to pull that out of the way so we can see a little bit better here. But this 72-pin connector just slides right off of this edge connector. So real easy to remove that. All right, so put that there to get our replacement. And you always want to make sure you're putting stuff back on the correct way. There we go. All right, so these connections actually look pretty decent, but it's not a bad idea to go ahead and maybe hit them with just a little bit of contact cleaner. Because we are putting a new connector on there. If there's any grime, we want to make sure that it's gone, but those connectors are bright. They look really, really good. All right, so let's get this new connector on here. And it just pushes right on. Make sure it's seated all the way down, and we'll get our RF shield back in there. All right, and then we'll set this back down where it goes. Perfect. All right, so there's that. Now we can get these screws back in here. I told you it was easy. I mean, it takes longer to take this thing apart and put it back together than it does to actually replace that connector. But now it should work just fine. Get those screws back in. There we go. We can get our cartridge back in here. There we go. Make sure that seats down properly. And it does. All right. All right, well, let's go ahead and skip ahead. Putting it back together is the opposite of taking it apart. You guys probably don't want to watch that. So let's go ahead and skip ahead to testing this thing out. All right, we're all hooked up, screws are in, everything's put back together. It's the moment of truth. Let's see if Zelda is going to work. Nice and tight fit. Well, there we go. That was an easy, quick fix for about 10 bucks. So if you've got an old NES that just will not boot a game or the red light flashes, chances are it's probably that edge connector. So give it a shot, spend a little bit of money, get your games back. That's all I've got for this week. If you liked the video, please be sure to give it a like, give me a subscribe. It really helps the channel. Until next time, happy playing.